everyone. After a wonderful panel which we saw, it makes me feel very humble, and I hope I can try and make it even maybe 10% interesting than what the wonderful panel did before me. So what we'll do is, for the next 10-15 minutes or so, talk about some of the tax nuances in domestic AIF and also in GIFT, because no discussion on AIF today is complete without GIFT City, and there are much more talking points in GIFT as compared to domestic, so I thought I'll include that also for you. So first one is a plain vanilla structure where you have investors putting money in a category of 1 or 2 AIF in domestic. As we all know, the taxation for a CAT 1 or 2 fund is pretty straightforward. Taxation is at the hands of the investors and not at the fund level, which means it has multiple benefits obviously. One is the tax certainty. Second is the ability of investors to claim loss offset. If there are capital loss, let's say in the AIF, and the investor has his own capital gains, then he can offset the two. If the investor comes from a foreign country, then he can claim treaty benefits, etc., all of which is not possible with a CAT 3. So taxation of CAT 1 and 2 is pretty much, I would say, the most simplest in the fund industry today. And in fact, in the budget 25, as you would know, the government has further clarified that for a CAT 1 or 2 AIF, any asset which they hold will be considered as a capital asset, and therefore the earlier doubt on taxation of income, whether it is business income or capital gains, no longer exists. So everything is now capital gains, similar to FPI. And particularly this impacts funds investing in real estate, funds doing certain kinds of stressed assets, etc., where there was, or funds doing a lot of churning on debt, where there was uncertainty earlier on whether my income would be capital gains or business income. Because if it is business income, then one is, there is no pass-through available. Everything was taxed in the hands of the trust, and the investor did not get a pass-through. But now with the clarity coming in the budget 25, that no longer exists for a CAT 1 or 2. And of course, the usual requirement of withholding tax for a domestic investor at 10% rate. For foreign investors, if you are paying them, you can give them treaty benefit and withhold at the lower or the higher rate. When you have foreign investors in your fund, there are certain nuances to be considered by you before you give them treaty benefits, and more so in the last 3 or 4 years. CBDT has been pretty much active in trying to analyze, and you would have seen in the papers court cases on Mauritius Treaty, on Cyprus. So it is very important that you have proper documentation with you before you give tax benefits to non-resident investors, and that basically includes a declaration from them that they do not have a PE, place of permanent establishment, or a POEM in India, that they are eligible for treaty benefits, they are a resident of their country, and they support that along with the tax residency certificate from their home country, which is compulsory. Based on a declaration, you cannot give them treaty benefits. The TRC is compulsory, supported by a form 10F, which I'm sure most of you know has to be filed electronically by the investor. On top of that, you have to do certain amount of due diligence to ensure that the investor is not doing treaty shopping. Let's say you have a US investor coming to a Cayman fund, or let's say a Mauritius or a Singapore fund. Some amount of diligence is required to see that whether he has adequate substance in that particular jurisdiction, in Singapore, Mauritius, wherever, before you can give them treaty benefits. For a CAT 3 fund, as we all know, there is no specific rule under Indian tax law. So the normal trust tax principles apply, which sometimes makes taxation of a CAT 3 AIF a bit complicated. First issue is whether the trust or a fund is, and I'm talking only of trust because as we know 90% of AIFs are set up as a trust, so I'll stick to that. First issue is whether the trust is a revocable or irrevocable trust, because if it is revocable, then the taxation goes back to the settler. Thankfully, the way PPMs are drafted and contribution agreements are drafted, the contribution by an investor is considered as irrevocable, even though there is a clause for redemption or payment back to the investor. So that issue is generally solved. The second issue is whether the trust is a determinate or an indeterminate trust, which means at any point of time, do we know the share of percentage holding or NAV or number of units of each investor or not. Now this is one area which so far has been very challenging, because if the trust is, let's say, indeterminate, then the trust is taxed at the maximum margin rate or MMR. And as per some argument, MMR even for capital gains can be 30%. Now, when is a trust called as determinate? When the shares of the investors are known. There was a CBDT circular of 2014 which said that the shares of the beneficiaries should be known at the time of the trust formation, and that created a lot of ambiguity for certain fund managers. You might have heard about India Advantage ruling in Karnataka. There's a couple of rulings in Tamil Nadu. So in those cases, people are more comfortable in taking a view that even if the beneficiaries are not known at the time of formation, but they are known at a future date, that makes the trust determinate. Thankfully, the Delhi High Court has recently issued a ruling, very recently, to say that even if at the time of the trust formation, the names and identity and the percentage holding of beneficiaries was not known, but it was known later on, that itself is sufficient. The tax department tried to argue that the CBT circular of 2014 requires them to know the beneficiary at the time of formation, but the High Court said that is something which is improbable, because when you file your trust deed with SEBI, you cannot know your investors, because till you get SEBI approval, you can't onboard investors. So there's a conflict between the CBT circular and the SEBI AIF regulations, and therefore the AIF regulations stand. Another good observation of the Delhi High Court is that income tax is a federal law. So you cannot have different rules in different states, and as long as there is no adverse order from the Supreme Court, or the order of the High Court is not reversed, or the High Court order for one state should apply to all states. Which means after the Delhi High Court order, there is much more clarity that irrespective of the state where you set up your AIF, as long as at certain periodical intervals you update your trust deed and the identity of the beneficiaries is known, the trust will be considered as determinate. Now, what should be that periodicity? For a closed-ended fund, we suggest as a practice that after every closing, the trust deed should be amended and investors or the updated list of investors should be identified. For an open-ended fund, it may be difficult to do that. Let's say it's a weekly closing, or some funds have a daily closing. You can't keep on updating your trust deed every day or every week. So we suggest that at least at the end of the year, the trust deed should be amended, revised trust deed should be filed with the registrar of trust, so that whenever the income tax wants to know for a particular financial year who are the beneficiaries and what is the number of units, that would be known. So that's one issue with Cat 3 AIFs. Otherwise, the tax rates are pretty much similar to what you would invest directly in India. 10 to 12.5% long term, 20% short term, and all those things. A couple of more issues which still remain and which beg for clarity from CBDT for Cat 3 AIF. One is on carried interest versus performance fee. So as we know, in a lot of cases, carried interest or performance fee is structured in a way that the manager gets a return on the investment rather than cash like management fee. So the typical classic question similar to most countries is that taxable as capital gains or as business income, and what is the impact on GST and earlier service tax? So again, no proper clarity there. We all know there was a service tax ruling in the case of ICICI which opened the Pandora's box. Thankfully, CBDT has not questioned carried interest except for a few cases here and there. But then one has to still be careful in terms of how you structure your carried interest, and there are multiple ways to do it. For example, you can get additional units whenever there's a carry coming to the fund manager, or you can get cash, obviously, which is the most riskiest, or you can just do an adjustment to your NAV, which means that you don't get any additional asset, and probably in my mind that is the least riskiest way to do. Plus there has to be certain more structuring done in terms of ensuring that the carried interest does not go to the same entity. For example, you have an entity which is a fund manager which gets the fees and also the carried interest, there's a greater chance that the tax authorities would say that you're just camouflaging and everything is part of management fees. So some structuring around the ownership and the way carry is given will help to reduce future risk. Another issue is in terms of management fees and other expenses. As we know, against capital gains income, the investor does not get any deduction. So there is in some sense a double taxation where the fund manager pays tax on the management fees and expenses, whatever vendors pay tax, but the investor of the fund does not get any deduction for that. And lastly, indirect taxation, or what is called as the Vodafone tax. CAT 1 and 2 and FPI CAT 1 get an exemption from the indirect share transfer tax, but CAT 3 AIF do not get the benefit. So let's say you have a structure where a US investor invests money through Cayman into a CAT 3 AIF. If the US investor is redeeming his interest in the Cayman fund, theoretically or technically that will be taxable in India if the Cayman fund has more than 50% exposure to India. So these are some issues which sometimes tax authorities do ask questions during audit, but at least in practice I have not seen any demand on this particular issue. This is a comparison between PMS AIF. I will not go through that. A large part of this is regulatory. Of course, tax-wise, for PMS, all the taxation is at the investor level and not the fund level. Whereas for CAT 3 AIF, as I said, the taxation is at the fund level, so that has its own pros and cons from a taxation point of view. But in the interest of time, we will skip this. As I was saying, we maybe next 5-7 minutes talk about a few structures in the GIFT City and what we are seeing today. So first one is a typical, same like domestic, a CAT 1 or 2 in the GIFT City, which pools money from offshore investors and then you invest in India. Or it could be Indian money going to a GIFT City fund, CAT 1 and 2, and being invested offshore in unlisted securities. Unfortunately, mixing of both money is not allowed. So you can't have Indian money and foreign money coming to one fund and then getting invested back to India, because that becomes round tripping. And even though FEMA does allow round tripping, but IFSCA does not allow round tripping because they don't want the GIFT City regime to be seen as a way to reroute Indian money back to India. So you need to have two separate funds for foreign money coming for Indian investment and Indian money going for offshore investment. CAT 1 and 2, even though the IFSCA FME regulations don't really define funds as AIF, but there's a deeming provision which says that depending on where you invest, the fund will be categorized as a CAT 1 and 2 or a CAT 3. So let's say if you do unlisted, you become a CAT 1 or 2 fund, in which case the domestic provision which I mentioned earlier, all of them apply, taxation at investor level, etc. Except for one or two key differences between GIFT and domestic. One is that the investor does not have to get a PAN and file a return, whereas in a domestic AIF, a foreign investor has to get a PAN and file a return from a KYC perspective. And the tax, therefore, in GIFT is paid by the fund on behalf of the investor. This is done to ensure parity with let's say, a Mauritius fund investing in India and bring them on par with a GIFT City fund. So that is one advantage of a GIFT City CAT 1 or 2. And more from a regulatory perspective, because as we know in a GIFT City fund, for example, there is no leverage restriction. In domestic, you can only borrow for temporary requirements. CAT 3 can borrow up to 2:1. But in GIFT, there is no leverage restriction. In GIFT, there are no concentration norms, etc. And lastly, for the fund manager, in GIFT, you get a 10-year income tax holiday out of 15 years. Plus, you don't pay MAT also if you set up your fund manager entity as a company or as a branch of a domestic company which has a 22% tax rate. So that's on CAT 1 and 2. And then on CAT 3, which is the most interesting part of the GIFT City and income tax framework. Because if you set up a CAT 3 fund in the GIFT City to invest in domestic listed securities, then under section 10(4)(d), all your capital gains from non-equity investments are completely exempt from tax, There's not even a 10-year holiday, it is permanently exempt. So whether you invest in REITs, InvITs, mutual funds, you do F&O from a GIFT City fund, everything has a complete income tax holiday for the fund. And then because the fund is liable to pay tax, the investor also is exempt from tax. So through and through, nobody pays tax if it's a Cat 3 AIF investing in non-equity instruments. And that is why we have seen a lot of F&O now happening through a GIFT City fund, because there's no leverage restriction also, which typically applies if a domestic AIF wants to do futures or options. And we have also seen some shifting of the P-note business, as is popularly called in our country, or the ODI business from offshore to GIFT City. For example, two banks, HSBC and Standard Chartered, offer P-notes on debt investments from a GIFT City fund, and this is the way they structure it, where the fund does not pay tax and the investor does not pay tax. And similar to Cat 1 and 2, investor does not have to file a return, get a PAN. So for him, he's completely kosher from Indian tax framework. So this is a fund-of-fund structure, which in certain cases is useful, because unlike domestic AIF regulations in GIFT City, any category of fund can invest in any category domestic. For example, Cat 3 AIF in GIFT can invest in Cat 2 domestic, which in India you can't do, right? Cat 3 in India cannot invest in a Cat 2. And sometimes this can be a very useful structure. I'll give you one example where this can be most optimal. If you have a Cat 2 fund in India and if you have a Cat 3 fund in GIFT City, then it is the most optimal structure. And you could use that for ARCs and certain kinds of investment. And why is it optimal? Because the Cat 2 fund in India will be passed through, so the taxation goes to the investor. The investor is a Cat 3 fund in GIFT, and as long as he is investing in non-equity instruments, there is no tax on the Cat 3 fund. An investor sitting abroad also does not pay tax. So which means through and through, nobody pays tax in such a situation. One or two more examples which are similar to what I described earlier, but mutual funds, for example. And we have seen HDFC, of course, has been in the press, and there are some more fund managers in the pipeline looking at setting up either a mutual fund or retail fund in GIFT, or this example where it is a Cat 3 fund in GIFT investing in domestic mutual funds. Now, even though the mutual fund is, let's say, is completely equity oriented, but because mutual fund units itself is not equity, the Cat 3 fund in GIFT will not pay tax. Mutual fund under 1023D, as we know, does not pay tax, and nobody ends up paying tax. One or two examples of outbound structures, I'll just take maybe 2 minutes more. One is resident Indian investment going abroad through a Cat 3, let's say doing listed or ETFs abroad, going through a Cat 3 fund in GIFT City. As we know now, there is clarity on repatriation. So if an individual wants to invest under the $250,000 LRS scheme, he can invest. If it's a family of 4, they can invest up to $1 million. On the other hand, if let's say if it's a family office or a company, then the limit is much higher. It is 50% of net worth, which a lot of people are now using to invest, let's say in the US. China was the flavor last year. Today it is the US and Europe. So a lot of investment is going to this 50% net worth route, where the provision actually says that you don't have to be a financial services company in India. So let's say you have a family office just pooling money, or maybe even a company doing some consulting or IT activity. It can invest up to 50% of its net worth into a GIFT City fund, and then the money can go abroad. So that's the regulatory benefit. Of course, tax, there is no benefit because government logically does not want to give any benefit to Indian residents like you and me who want to invest abroad through a GIFT City fund. The benefit they want to give is vice versa for foreign investors to invest in India. From tax point of view, you get no benefit, but taxation regime depends on whether it's a Cat 1 or 2 fund and GIFT or a Cat 3. If it's a 1 or 2, then you as an investor pay tax. If it's a 3, then the Cat 3 fund will pay tax, and when you get the money as an investor, it will be tax exempt. Again, similar regulatory benefits, no leverage, no concentration norms, So unlike a domestic AIF putting money offshore where there are limits, 25% of the corpus plus overall limits set by RBI, in a GIFT City AIF there are no limits, so you can put 100% of your money in offshore securities. That is one. And the second structure which we are also now seeing in certain fund managers is they are setting up a GIFT City fund to attract foreign money going into foreign securities. So NRI, OCI money, and sorry, one point I forgot to mention is, unlike a domestic fund or FPI, in a GIFT City fund, you can have 100% NRIs, OCIs, which is the benefit given only to GIFT. So if you take foreign money and invest abroad, again here it's a tax haven, if I can say that, because all the investments will be in foreign securities, so no tax on that. The fund manager gets a 10-year income tax holiday. The investors are abroad, so they get a holiday. So through and through, nobody paid tax on this. And sometimes I wonder, with all these benefits, and I hope nobody's there from the GIFT City authorities, are we really gaining as much as the benefits we are giving to investors? Of course, that's a debate which we can all argue both ways. But this is the regime which is there in India. It's like a tax haven which people are taking advantage of. Yep, so that's about it from my side. I hope I've kept you more time. Thank you.